So we want to talk first about the nature of authority itself. And then under that, the first thing we need to talk about is power. What is power? Power, in general, quote, is the ability to do or make, the capacity for acting, unquote. In effect, power is the ability to bring about change in something. It's the ability to bring about change. I'm sure you've heard that phrase that you don't have all the authority but have no power, right? So you can be put in charge of something but you can't get anything done. Whereas some people have all the power but they have no authority to be doing it. Okay, but it's the ability to get things changed, get things done. There's a writer by the name of Woolner who defines authority. So we're gonna talk about authority. We have to break down all of the different. So we're going to give the definition of authority and literally go word by word through it to give a sense of this is exactly what we're talking about, so it's clear in our minds. Okay. He defines authority as the moral power to command or enforce obedience in a community. Moral authority is a right granted by moral law to impose obligation on the acts of others. Moral power to bind persons to act and not to act in certain ways under a penalty of sinning. So in this definition, we see a few essential things. The first is authority is a moral power. By moral, we mean what? Because today, I've found it kind of interesting is that in the mainstream news media, you can talk about everything that's politically correct under the sun, but the minute you bring up morality about it, everyone just wilts, right? And so this is the fact that morality has just been kind of thrown out, but a lot of it has to do is because people don't even know what morality is, right? Moral, something is moral because it pertains to reason. Why is that? Reason has the ability to grasp, because God put in our minds, he built a structure into our minds that inclines our minds to be able to judge that certain things are right and wrong, right? It's built right into our mind. It's called the natural law. It's actually technically part of what they call the third category of natural inclination. That is, those inclinations that are proper to us as human beings because of reason. So it's the reason's ability to see this is right and wrong. Now, that natural law, St. Thomas says, needs to be formed properly. The human mind needs to be formed properly. That is, it needs to be formed in congruity with the natural law. What does that mean? So if you actually read his Summa Contra Gentiles, St. Thomas's, basically he argues to the totality of the Ten Commandments based purely on the natural line of reason without any appeal to Scripture whatsoever. And so basically, if you look at the Ten Commandments, those are actually just an explication of the natural law. God is just telling us, this is how you're designed. This is what you have to do, right? And so this is what this is how you're going to have to behave. Now, this is very important because if God designed us a certain way and we act contrary to it, then what's going to happen is it's going to cause us to act contrary to our nature. And the technical term for that is violence. Violence is action contrary to the nature of a thing. That's its formal philosophical definition. And so what happens is if we don't form our conscience right, or if we start judging things wrong that are actually right and vice versa, then it actually will do violence to us. And then the effect of violence is weakness. You weaken the thing that you are violent in relationship to. So what happens is if people don't get a proper moral formation, they don't have clarity of mind, they don't have acuity, they don't have really sharpness or lack of precision. That is one of the biggest problems in theology today, lack of precision. Why is there lack of precision? Basically it's because of the fact that they don't define their terms and they're unwilling to basically hurt people's feelings. But there's lack of precision. Okay. So something is moral because of the fact that it pertains to reason. Now, one of the conferences I'm going to do eventually, I just haven't gotten around to getting it all together. Haven't found the right venue for it either, but Basically, what I want to talk about is something that is very important in relationship to this term moral. Because we have a natural inclination to judge that things are right and wrong, if you don't get the right moral formation, you're still going to judge that things are right and wrong. You're just going to judge the wrong things as right and wrong. Let's give you a perfect example. Some guy is shacking up with his girlfriend, but is accosting you because you're not wearing a mask. All right? Some guy, some girl is living with her boyfriend, but she says, but I'm a good girl. Or, you're seeing this across the board, right? God bless the millennials. The only reason I pick on them is because they're an easy target. Right? Okay. But you see this with some of the millennials. They have no moral compass, and yet they'll just blow up at you on these things they're just completely irrelevant in life, right? And so it's actually mind-boggling, right? But this is a very key point. We actually saw it in the Elizabethan period, right? This is where I started noticing it just as a pattern in history. This is the way we behave as human beings. You don't get the right moral formation, you're just going to think that certain things are right and wrong that aren't. So in Elizabethan period, you could basically be living like a prostitute, and that was okay. But if you had bad manners, that was morally sinful. Now, some of you probably heard me, you've probably heard that I like cigars and scotch, right? But I one time actually said from the pulpit, there's something wrong with a culture when fornication is a virtue and smoking is a mortal sin, right? This is what I'm talking about. People can't see because they don't have the right moral formation. And what's the right moral formation? That moral formation that tells us what's right and wrong based upon how God designed us through the natural law. That's what it is. And when people depart from that, you're just going to end up all over the map. So moral is that which pertains to reason. And it's not just reason in general, it's what we call right reason. So right reason, the philosophers always defined as that person's mind when it's in conformity with reality and in conformity with the true natural law, how God designed us. That's how we know we have right reason. Okay, so authority is a moral. It's a moral authority. It's a moral power. We're going to see this in a bit. Okay, so if we give a fuller understanding of the nature of authority, we can define it this way. It's a right, it's a moral claim. So let's back up. So moral is something that reason can see. It's not something our emotions, we all know that. Our emotions sometimes when things are, there might be something that's morally right to do, but emotionally we're upset, right? So our emotions aren't the ones that are going to make this judgment. It's actually reason. So in this sense, it's a moral right. What's a right? We hear this all the time. I got a right to this. You got a right to nothing, right? The fact is that it's the term right is just bantered around like, a woman has a right to her body. Actually, that's true. She does. The problem is she doesn't have an unconditional right. She has a conditional right. And that conditional right, what are the conditions? The natural law. And that means that she doesn't have a right to kill the child in her womb, right? So, and that's why that's lack of precision when we hear she has a right over her body. There's a certain aspect of that rings kind of true, right? But if you understand it with precision, yes, she does, but only within the confines of the natural law, then it makes sense. But if you just kind of throw it out there, it's kind of hard. Without it being clearly defined, it becomes almost impossible to combat. So a right is a moral claim. It's a moral, so it's something recognized by reason, claim, that is, that someone has an obligation to render something or not do something in relationship to me. That's what a right is. So it's a moral claim on the side of action or non-action in relationship to others. That's what a right is. So the natural law, by inclining us to do specific kinds of actions means that I have a right to fulfill the natural law, and therefore you cannot impose upon that if you don't have the proper authority. And this is a moral claim on my part. You have to render this to me. Right? That's what a right actually is. So a right is a moral claim recognized by reason on the obligations of others. Okay. We're going through this slowly because I want you to see even demons have to respect our natural law because it's part of the law that God put in place. Okay. So a right is a moral claim on the side of others. So authority is a right that is a moral claim of disposition. Now, by disposition, we mean, the example I always give is gnomes. Okay, let's just say for the sake of argument, I have a bunch of gnomes in my front yard. Okay. And some guy comes up and he tries to start moving my gnomes around or stealing my gnomes, right? As human beings, what's our first inclination? Our first inclination is to establish our right of determining what happens with those gnomes. Hey, those are my gnomes. And then what do? We tell the guy, get off my property. Okay, so basically what that means is that I have a right to determine the disposition of a thing. This is even true in relationship to parents and the rights of their children. They have a right to determine certain matters in relationship to their children's lives. And the state does not in relationship to certain things, even though the state is out of control. Okay. So it's a moral, okay, so let's back up. So an authority is a moral right of disposition, either in action or thing, that is somebody has to, it's a right. So basically authority is that when I command someone to do something, that I have a moral claim over the individual in relationship to the action that he must perform or that particular thing. So in the case of the gnomes, it's I have a right to determine what's going to happen with the gnomes. With the children, I have a right, if I had children, I would have the right to determine that this is what my child must do under certain circumstances. I have a right to just in disposition in relationship to my kids. This is why, the church has always said the first educators, even in matter of religion, are the parents of their children. And so the state does not have first rights in relationship to the children. Okay. So it's a right of disposition, either an action or thing, on the side of the one who has authority in relationship to others by which they must follow his legitimate commands. So authority is something which reason, God built into our intellects, a structure that gives us an ability to grasp that what this person is telling me to do, I am bound to do. We see this all the time with kids, right? A 3-year-old kid, okay, he might act up once in a while, but if you tell him knock it off, it's in his mind. He knows he's got to stop it, right? He might still kind of run around a little bit, but eventually he knows he's got to stop it. Okay, and how do we know this too is because part of this authority structure is to recognize that when the authority says stop it and you don't stop it, that they have the right of disposition, which means they can stop you from doing it. So when you hold the kid down, it's not like all of a sudden he stops and says, you have no right to hold me here, right? They only learn that later when they've been watching TV or going to public school. All right. All right. So authority is a structure that God puts in our minds that when someone who has, in this chain of authority, we'll talk about that in a minute, there's a structure to it, that when someone who has legitimate authority who's over me, gives me a command to do it, intellectually, I feel bound to do it. Now, this is why I said in relationship to the demons, that authority is so absolutely clear in their minds. Because the way demons function is the same way that angels function, which means when they think of a concept, they're not like human beings where they got to think about it for a little while to kind of figure it out. As soon as the concept comes into their minds, they instantaneously exhaust everything there is to know about that essence completely to the degree that their intellect can. Just instantaneously, they fully understand it. It's a great diagnostic, by the way, in possession. Because if someone comes in and you ask them some question, and they're like, you're not possessed. Because you ask a demon, what's the story with this? Well, it's this. They never have to think about it. The only time that they'll look at you puzzled is if you're saying something that's incoherent, right? Or it could be interpreted 50 different ways, right? Okay, so it's a structure that God puts in our minds. This is why if we keep acting against it over the course of time, we're going to become absolutely miserable if we keep acting against the authority structure, okay? And against the people who have a legitimate right to tell us what to do. This is why, I know I'm going to get just crucified for this, but it's got to be said. When Eve ate the fruit, she stepped out from underneath a twofold authority structure. Not just God's who told them not to do this, but according to the fathers of the church, Eve was not told directly by God to not eat the fruit of the tree. He told that to Adam directly, and Adam told it to Eve. And the fathers of the church say it's because Adam, the head of the family, is in charge of the cult and the code of the family. It's his responsibility. When she ate the fruit independently of Adam, she stepped out from underneath Adam's authority and therefore became subject to diabolic influence. That's the domain of the demons. Why did she do it? She did it because there was an appeal to Eve for a few things. Self-sufficiency, independently of her husband, that she gets to make this choice and do this thing and attain this thing independently of her husband. Self-sufficiency, and also that she didn't have to be subject or subordinate to him. Okay. And so that's why afterwards she hands the fruit to him, which is basically taking headship. That's the effect. That is the effect of already stepping out from underneath his headship. And so there's a distinctive authority structure. Modern feminism is the perfection of this disordered inclination in what we call the curse of Eve. All women are stuck with this now. All men are stuck with what we call the curse of Adam, which is effeminacy, tendency towards effeminacy, and a tendency towards irresponsibility. That's what men are stuck with. But with women, it's this tendency that, in fact, in Hebrew, it says your desire shall be for your husband. That's the punishment God gives to Eve. In Hebrew, it means two things. It means women have a stronger inclination. They want to be around their husband. That's why when a husband goes off for a long period of time and he's not around, it's hard for women. The second thing is, in Hebrew, the desire for means the desire to control. And this is because she stepped out from underneath that authority structure and acted contrary. And with God, the punishment always fits the crime. And so now she has to struggle with that. With Adam, what did he get stuck with? Well, he wasn't responsible and he was unwilling to suffer, according to the fathers of the church, separation from his wife. And so as a result of that, his tendency is towards seeking pleasure rather than pursuing what's arduous. And that's the definition of effeminacy.